What's poppin'? It's your boy Jack Slack, Fights Gone By podcast, and it's Thanksgiving, I believe. Isn't it the last Thursday of November? So maybe no one hears this and listens to it tomorrow, or maybe you're all sick to death of your family and have disappeared into another room to listen to something. Whatever the case, there's fuck all going on in the fight world, so we're going to be talking news, we're going to be recapping the Bellator event briefly. Going to have a little look at Polaris, which is going on this weekend. Because we in the UK don't give a fuck about Thanksgiving, and we're totally over America, by the way. And we'll do some questions too, just to, round out podcast. Hopefully, might be a shit one because, like I said, there's nothing going on. But let's talk about some news because there was some. I was going to say there's some good news this week. There was some fucking horrible news this week, and it's something that I haven't really touched on because this is supposed to be like a light-hearted, make fun of shit podcast. But Walt Harris's daughter, that whole thing has been unfolding, and I didn't want to touch on it because, again, this is a light-hearted podcast, but also because I was holding out hope for the best, even when you know the statistics and how bad it's looking. So yeah, you all know about that. I don't really need to say anything more about that. It's fucking bone-chilling stuff. Absolutely heartbroken for Walt Harris and his family. And fuck those people, and I hope they get justice, And then the other one was that Jeremy Stevens' coach went missing in Tijuana, and almost immediately you're like, okay, well, that's not great. And then you got confirmation of a body, and yeah, really just fucking tragic week in MMA, to be honest. But let's talk about the good stuff. Let's be upbeat, let's be positive, because I'm feeling pretty good about this upcoming card next week. I've Overeem versus Rosenstruck, I was like, and then Ben Rothwell versus Stefan Struve is on the main card too. But then I looked around it, and it's actually a pretty solid around those heavyweight fights. You've got to get the rubes in with the heavyweights that they know from 2002 or whatever. But the other fights, you've got Song Yadong versus Cody Stamann. One's part of a plant, one's a made-up word. You've got Rob Font on the card. It's actually not bad. But anyway, news this week, big announcement was that Wilder versus Fury is supposedly set for February. Set in heavyweight boxing can mean anything, because I feel like this rematch was already set once. And Tyson Fury's rematch with Vladimir Klitschko was also set once. He is the man who avoids the rematches somehow. But that'd be really good, because if you didn't see at the weekend, I wrote a piece about Ortiz versus Wilder, but if you didn't see, was that last weekend or weekend before? This drought is killing me. But Wilder, he did what he does. He fucking gave up, was it 6 rounds? Just got outboxed, and then found him with one punch and knocked him out. People are having the debate now, is Wilder the hardest puncher of all time? We can't really know if he's the hardest puncher of all time. The hardest puncher of all time is probably some fat fuck like Butterbean, who can just swing his arm really hard. But he's certainly the best one-punch knockout artist that I've ever seen. In terms of can knock a guy out or finish him with one punch, and also very rarely throws beyond one punch. Joe Louis, Mike Tyson, people like that, enormous punches, but a lot of their effectiveness was in their brilliant boxing, counter-punching, working combination. Wilder is just a completely different type of fighter, and if you gave me prime Tyson versus Wilder or prime, well, maybe not prime Lewis versus Wilder, but I would pick all those better boxers over him, and then he'd probably knock them out after losing 6 rounds anyway. So just a bizarre person, but the Fury fight cannot wait, because the first one was Tyson Fury boxing his ears off and then getting dropped. I think it didn't get dropped twice, but the last one he looked like he was properly knocked out, eyes closed, opened them up, did the Undertaker sit up from the floor, and then was just like, no, I'm fine, back to work. And then by the end of that same round, he had Wilder backing up and looking hurt and trying to hold. If you haven't seen that first fight, I cannot recommend it enough. I watched it with my wife, and she does not give a fuck about combat sports, but she loved it. Couldn't remember it when I brought it up again later. She's like, I don't remember watching that, Jack. But yeah, we had a good time watching that. I feel like the precedent in these sort of first fight dodgy result rematches is that the guy who benefited from the dodgy result tends to do better and maybe even win in the second match. Think Ward versus Kovalev, Gennady Golovkin versus Canelo Alvarez. But yeah, can't wait for that. Not too long away. Well, I don't know, 3 or 4 months. A financial quarter away. What else we got? Josh Emmett versus Arnold Allen. That's a nice fight. Also, a return to stiffer competition for Arnold Allen because, you can be the hottest prospect in the world, but he fought Mads Bennell and then he was off for a little while, and then he fought Gilbert Melendez for seemingly no reason. And that was, it was a showcase fight. It made him look really good. But that's like a year that he's basically done nothing against world-class competition, but he broke into the rankings off that, which is always ridiculous. It just sums up how bad the rankings are, that Arnold Allen is a monster, and then he has to beat the Gilbert Melendez on a 6-fight slump who has never fought a featherweight before to get into the rankings. Because it's all name recognition, because it's I was going to say a council of idiots. It's a confederacy of dunces. It's 14 dudes who vote based on name value. But Emmett's coming off that knockout of Mirsad Bektic and the one over Michael Johnson. The Michael Johnson one was kind of weird. He just danced around for 3 rounds trying to do the same thing over and over again. Bektic, he got it done much sooner. Anyway, you look at that, it's a good matchup. No one's missing out there. No one's being kept waiting or doing a stupid fight like the bantamweight crop of fighters currently are. Everyone's got an old man fight just to keep them busy. No, that's a good fight. What else is going on? Heaps of retirements this week. John Wayne Parr's fighting this weekend. I think it's a boxing match, not even a Thai boxing match, because he's a Thai boxing legend. But it's his last fight, he's decided. So I feel like he might have retired before, but the guy has been around forever. The first series of the Contender Asia, it was him and Yodson Clay in the final. And you compare that to like the Contender, the original American series. You go, fucking hell, this is actually legit. But an Australian fight legend, came up with, but was one of the first to promote Muay Thai in the cage, which we now fucking love, and just an all-round great guy. Who else is retiring? Gerald Harris, I swear he's retired already, but he's retiring again. Known for slamming people. Like, dudes kept jumping guard on him along the fence, and then he'd just slam them and knock them out, forearm across the throat so that they can't keep their head off the mat when you drop them. But he was a really exciting fighter. But then he decided, he kept like bouncing around in weight, going up in weight, fighting as a very wide but very short middleweight at several points, despite being a welterweight. Fought Rafael Lovato on short notice a little while ago. Just never really got it all together. And I think part of that is, he got cut from the UFC kind of early, one of those questionable cuts, kind of like Mads Bennell. And then the other one this week is Nordine Taleb, says his next fight's going to be his last fight. I mean, I was just sort of getting into Nordine Taleb. I mean, he got absolutely taken apart by Muslim Salikov, the other fight, but I was just sort of getting into him, and he has been around forever, though. He's been doing this forever, and I think he's like 36, 37, so fair enough. I respect people saying that their next fight's going to be their last, but, be aware that if he wins, he might then go, I think I've got one title run left in me. In terms of other fights announced, Valentina Shevchenko versus Caitlin Chookagian was made official. Meh. Someone tagged me in the thread on Reddit because obviously people will like yawn, and then someone jumps in with how could you even say that about Valentina? She knocks people out with head kicks. my response is just, people, eh? People. Just one person. Oh, that guy, her stalker, was back this week. People keep tweeting me whenever he shows up because he replies to every one of her comments with a timestamp for no reason, and I love you, Val, or whatever. And then a picture of himself doing whatever he's doing at the time. Or occasionally what I referred to as a beef cum tribute. But he'll just send random pictures of dishes of beef that he's cooked, and it doesn't even look appetizing. But apparently, and this is where I learn about culture by mocking other people, but apparently some Russian people jumped in and they said it's a dish that a man cooks for a woman, and it has specific connotations of I can take care of you, I'll cook you beef. But yeah, so Valentina's fighting again. Big wet fart. And then the exciting one was Bendo versus Chandler 2, because Bendo versus Chandler 1 was awesome. Everyone's sort of forgotten about Bendo. He is still very, very good. He was always winning and losing split decisions in competitive fights, and so he'd have a competitive fight against very old, washed up Josh Thompson or Gilbert Melendez, but he'd also have super competitive fights with the very best in the world. And he did it with Chandler. Everyone thought he was done coming into that fight, and he took a beating but came back, and it was a really good competitive fight. Also has a win over everyone in the BMF division, basically. And then get a load of this one, Anthony Pettis versus Diego Ferreira, with a quiet boy. I don't know what his actual nickname is. Everyone has to have one, but I'm calling him the Quiet Boy because when I see he's got a fight announced, I go, ooh, I'm quietly excited about him. No one seems to give a shit, but his last fight was actually, I think, sort of a breakout with at least the hardcores, because he fought Mehbek Taisimov, who everyone was super hot on, and he put him through the ringer. Just pressure, good striking combined with pressure, and he did it to Rustam Khabilov too. And if you can pressure Rustam Khabilov and stop his takedowns, that's impressive, because Jorge Masvidal tried to pressure him and got wheel kicked in the head for doing it. Khabilov's entire game is just that old Dagestani backstep, as we called it, because it was him and fucking Ali Bagatutinov used to do that. They'd sit on the fence and shoot into the middle of the cage. But Diego Ferreira is tremendous fun. He is night and day between his current model and his fight with Dustin Poirier back in 2015. But even then, Dustin Poirier was a completely different fighter back in 2015. Both of those guys have improved so much technically. I'm very, very impressed. But that could be a great fight for him because, Anthony, the pressure that he put on Taisimov in that last fight was tremendous, and it worked really well. And Anthony Pettis hates that. We saw that in the RDA fight. We see that in just about every fight he loses. Tony Ferguson most recently, but just keep pushing him back, and he hates it. However, I don't know if that overrules the power of the Pettis record, because Pettis cannot win or lose 2 fights in a row. He has to be literally hit and miss. And he just lost his last one. So, I think Diego Ferreira signed his death warrant there. What went on at the weekend? A Bellator event. My boy Harry Hardwick was on the undercard. Shout out to him. Got his head all split open. Big old, like it was done with a knife, cut up his head. Had a rough first round because of that. But then came back second and third, won him comfortably, and won the decision. Good man. Friend of the podcast, Harry Hardwick. Give his fight a look. It was one of the better ones on there because, a lot of these Bellator ones, and I'm going to get into this in a second because, well, I'll get into it now. Fucking hell. This lad, I think he's Estonian. And afterwards I looked at some of the comments on Twitter, and some of the guys who knew him, like Composer, knew him as just a bum smasher. He, that sounds different, but he basically has a record of like 22-8, but the 22 guys have 1 fight each. It's crazy. It's like that guy who fought Haim Ghazali the other week in Israel in that obvious dive. I don't know where Scott Coker's finding these people, but he must know. He can spot talent, or at least his matchmaker, whoever he uses, always has been able to. So this guy gets kicked in the leg a couple of times, allegedly breaks his leg, but I think that was probably made up afterwards to save some face. But he ends up in the bottom of half guard. He's looking like he's hating it. And the other guy puts frames on him with his forearm across his throat. Now, not pleasant by any means, but something that you deal with even if you're not doing MMA, even if you're just grappling, you are doing this every time you roll. Someone will put their forearm across your throat. And he had the underhook as well. It was just... And then he taps to forearm pressure. And some people were like, I think tapping to pressure is legit. Now, fair enough, if you're tapping to pressure like Josh Barnett is on top of you and scarf holding you and has been for 20 minutes, maybe. But if you're in the supposed second best organization in the world and you have a 22-8 record, you should be able to fucking deal with it. It's not even like knowing the right way to get out of it. It's just, if you turn your head, it's not on your windpipe anymore, so it's not going to choke you. That's. I don't even know how you can tap to that. Granted, the dude is probably a lot tougher than me, as he is a professional fighter, but you shouldn't be seeing pros losing like that in an organization as high visibility as Bellator. And then in your main event, you had Michael Venom Page knock out some nobody with the first punch he threw, I think. But I was saying how pleased I am that everyone's catching on now, and all of Scott Coker's all of the comments on the highlights of this are like, who the fuck cares? Stop fighting cans. But it clearly is still working, because I still see a lot of people being like, damn, why is this guy not in the UFC yet? Like, because he doesn't fight anyone good. Because he doesn't want to. Because he's happy making tons of cash to beat up nobodies. And there's always this contingent that are like, who could blame him? He's doing the smart thing. And you're like, yeah, he is, but people shouldn't be buying it. People shouldn't be watching it. If you, like I said it last week, if you share these knockouts, you're just making the fight world a worse place. So what's going on this weekend? You got Polaris, couple of interesting grapplers on that. You got Tommy and Espen from Wolfing House are on it, and you got Luke Rockhold versus Nicky Rodz in the main event, which should be good. Watched the Road to Polaris videos are always good fun and well produced, and they had Luke Rockhold on, and he's being like his usual douchey self, but you do kind of feel for him. But they showed him rolling with Buchecha, which is quite cool, and he says I think jiu-jitsu should be aimed towards self-defense, blah, blah, blah. And he goes, a lot of the guys now, they pull guard and they play on their back, and that's just not cool. He's going on about how, the sport's gone a bad way since he left. And then you look and you're like, you were competing in 2006. Fucking everyone was pulling guard then, too. It's not a new development. But the top comment on it was, did this Guido motherfucker just say that Luke Rockhold isn't used to fighting in front of large audiences like Polaris? And then you get there, and Nicky Rodz actually said it, and you're like, fuck's sake, Nicky, why are you so dumb? But it should be good. You got Nicky Rodz versus Luke Rockhold, and Luke Rockhold is good at stopping takedowns and good at snagging necks, and Nicky Rod is good at slapping up people's shit with collar ties and doing wicked fast back takes. Right, let's do a couple of questions, and then we'll get out of here for this week. Oh, I got a good complaint the other day. Complaint from a concerned Patreon boy. Don't you Brits know the difference between heritage and citizenship? Andy Ruiz is Mexican? Does that make Deontay Wilder African? In which case, America has had a total of 0 boxing champions? Brackets, unless there's a Native American I don't know about, very possible. Do better, from Zachary. Sorry to do this to you, Zachary, but Article 30 of the Mexican Constitution states that those born to 2 Mexican citizens outside of Mexico have Mexican nationality. Get your academics in order and then come back at the king, son. Bon oui oui, Monsieur Slack. I've been wondering what's the point of practicing on a heavy bag, or even basic pads, when a lot of fighting is distance. I've become disenfranchised with a nice technical hook, or roundhouse, when a wild swinging hook gets good results so much. When you have footwork with Jones, Israel, or Connor, throwing like you have on a heavy bag, don't understand that sentence, but you're going to hit air. Then you do the opposite and run onto a punch. I'm sure it's bloody obvious but that I'm being daft, but ellipses. And then also my skull hurts when I try neck bridges. Are they unhealthy? Any good for MMA? Thanks from Phil. This is something that all coaches tend to get on about when you're doing the heavy bag stuff. Because the heavy bag is quite satisfying, it's very easy to get in the habit of just blasting it or blasting combinations on it and not moving, not using your head movement and stuff. I always liked the solution that Kenny Weldon had. He's coached a lot of top amateurs down in, I think he's Texas way, but he did a load of videos back in the day called You Too Can Learn to Box or whatever. But yeah, good amateur coach. And what he has is his heavy bags go down from he's got a high ceiling at his place. It's like an old warehouse or something, but a very long chain on his heavy bags, and he's got 2 different lengths of chain. So if he wants his fighter working against a very mobile opponent, he'll have them on the very long chain heavy bag, or he'll just have them on the normal heavy bag if they're working normal stuff. And the heavy bag swings around, and basically, if the heavy bag's swinging back at them, they're to straight punch. If it's moving away from them, they're to double jab in on it and try and get in on hooks and things like that. And obviously, when you hook a heavy bag, it starts swinging in a perpendicular direction to what it was originally. It's a nice way around that. Obviously, still not ideal because it's not throwing back at you. But then, there isn't a piece of training kit that's ideal like that. That's why the tie pads and good mitt work stuff is so helpful. More tie pads because guys get into a more sort of flowy back and forth state. The ties, if you watch a good tie on the pads, it tends to get to sort of, it's almost like sparring, but they can throw as hard as they like without worrying about hurting the opponent. The opponent isn't always throwing hard back at them. So you're keeping your reactions sharp, you're working your defense, you're throwing hard, and you're actually hitting stuff. Which is, as close to the best of everything as you can get. But a lot of that's more the flawed nature of heavy bag work in terms of neglecting defense. People like Customato insisted on a defensive head movement after every combination thrown, or even multiple defensive head movements. Yeah, there's no really heavy bag. Really hard to work your feet and do it. Unless you have that very long chain. Because I loved long distance point fighty stuff. I always try to treat it like if I want to, when I'm sparring, I'll work at my low pace, high accuracy, or ideally high accuracy. Low work rate, Machidery sort of style. But whenever I can, I like shadow box, or when I'm hitting the heavy bag, or when I'm hitting the double end bag, or things like that. I try and keep my activity way up so that I could throw X 100 punches around. No, not X 100, but I could throw 100 punches around or whatever, even if I'm only going to throw like 10. I think you have to take everything as its own sort of training. You aren't going to be able to work your footwork and that sort of style in every form of training, but you do still want to work the heavy bag. You want to work the double end bag, things like that. It's kind of like spending a lot of time slipping and get a slip ball or even a sock with a tennis ball in. And working on slipping and head movement and stuff. But in the MMA world, that's going to be a tiny portion of the fight. That's going to be if you're caught in a bad position and you just need to slip a punch quickly. Whereas in boxing, that would be a much bigger portion of the fight. You'd actually be actively working to exchanging range and moving your head the whole time. I think if anything, get yourself a training partner or whatever, and do a couple of rounds of just footwork training, and you'll see lots of coaches do this in boxing and kickboxing and MMA. The coach will just, or the training partner will just move towards you, and you will sidestep and circle to the other side of the ring or whatever. And that's the sort of, and if you as you get better, you can have them trying to cut the ring a little bit more and be a little bit more of a pain in the arse. But that's the sort of training that you can set up yourself with just one other person, and doing a few rounds of that is going to be equivalent to the heavy bag, but working on the thing that you're talking about working. You can't work everything on every piece of apparatus. What's up, Jack? Newly minted Patreon boy here. Quite enjoyed your bit about Cuban fighters from last week's pod, and I had further questions for you in that regard. Were they ever getting assistance, brackets, coaching, funding for facilities, etc., from the Soviets during the period you were discussing? Did they get access to the, shall we say, Soviet strength and conditioning program? Thanks in advance, and Yo Romero's incredible all-natural traps bless. From Ben. Wasn't Cuba one of the ones that got funding from both the Soviets and China? And they sort of competed. But I do know that they had a fairly decent relationship between the boxing teams. There's a great piece of historical footage on YouTube. What's his name? It's not Gradopolov. He was... KV Gradopolov wrote... Tactics of the Foreign Masters, which is a book that I really enjoyed. It's like a boxing book about famous fighters through time who have influenced the game of boxing and the techniques that they brought with them. It's all in Russian, though. But you can find it on various Russian file-sharing sites. But there are several, famous Soviet coaches, because it's like 30-something years we're talking about here. But whoever it is, they're in Cuba, and there's palm trees everywhere, and it's a load of, beautifully sunned Cuban lads boxing with these pasty white Russian dudes. And it's really interesting just to watch the two teams working together, and they're sparring. They're going pretty hard for on grass, is what I'd say, compared to if you watch the Cuban team just sort of training out in the open now. They only really half-ass things. They're just working on openings and stuff like that, but these guys are cracking each other with decent punches. But there was enough of a crossover between them. The problem with all this Soviet era boxing stuff is that you're going on no one, as far as I know, there hasn't been an awful lot written about it. There isn't a lot of, there's not a documentary about it you can watch or anything like that. So you're going on the accounts of people who spoke to other people who were on the Olympic boxing team or had spoken to some of the coaches who were and things like that. Generally, it's accepted that the Soviets had a good amount of influence on the Cuban boxing team, but you occasionally see people saying oh no, Cuban boxing wouldn't be anything without the Soviet input. But obviously, they had tremendous success before they went communist. They had several world champions in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s. It's a fascinating area, and it's one I'd love to find out more about. But again, every time I look for more info, it just seems to be people's word of mouth of what they experienced. It's never, a researched article or a book, Dear Jack, the Danny D of moaning about all things UFC. it really... Ask me about your dong. It really annoys me no end that there always seems to be more interest around, quote, super fights between champions and contenders of different weight classes. The one that has been really annoying me lately is the talk of a fight between Khabib and Usman or Covington. Not saying that they wouldn't be fun, I don't think it would be, but anything is possible. I just long for the days when we could focus on the champions defending in their own divisions and those divisions advancing accordingly, rather than Izzy calling out John Jones or what have you. That being said, I recently found myself pondering how a Wonderboy Adesanya matchup would look, since they clearly don't plan on letting Wonderboy anywhere near the welterweight title anytime soon. Curious as to your thoughts, given that Wonderboy gives up something like 4 inches in height and 5 inches in reach. Sincerely, Aaron. Oh, that took a twist. I thought it was going to be it started with a rant about crossweight fights and it asked me about a crossweight fight. I think Wonderboy's really... The Wonderboy has trouble with guys who aren't going to come to him. You know, he's really at his best when he's playing the Matador. He's not really as good when he has to go forwards, particularly when he got people along the fence. You know, that's where Pettis came off and caught him. That's where Tyron Woodley came off and caught him. Even Vicente Luque, whenever he got hurt, he'd just go back to the fence, and Wonderboy would try and come in with like single shots or a couple of punches at a time, and almost always get caught by a counter left hook or an overhand right while he was trying to recover. So I think the height and reach would really be a problem for him. I think if Izzy really wanted to make Wonderboy come to him, that would be a problem too. In fact, the more I think about it, the more I just hate that fight for Wonderboy. It's just, you know, I put him in against aggressive bangers and make them look silly, is what I say. You know, don't put him in with savvy technicians who will sit back and make him come forward. Ahoy, ahoy, Jackie boy! I've got a couple of questions for you today. First of all, I am a student of Taekwondo, but not the style of Taekwondo that is shown at the Olympics, where the sparring slash fighting is more similar to kickboxing, except no leg kicks, elbows and knees. When sparring, most of my opponents tend to stay at long slash kicking range, and while I am fine with this distance, I am wondering if you could illuminate any tips or tricks into closing the distance that aren't just walking towards the guy or using a kick to close the distance. I have toyed with stepping in with punches, but I was wondering if you could give me any more techniques, and furthermore, people I should watch who are good at weaponizing distance. Second question, and it's shorter. Have you ever considered doing commentary for a fight promotion? How do you think you would do, seeing as you have a vast knowledge of the fight game? All buttery. Appreciate the answers from Joe. I've been asked occasionally to do like things for smaller orgs. I don't know. I mean, I like giving out to commentators, but I, again, don't envy them. It's kind of like how I like giving out to refs, but I don't envy them. It's a hard job. You're going to get shat on. In my current format, you know, people choose to listen to me or read my stuff. And some people might be like, good God, this guy's annoying, but they don't have to come back, you know. Whereas if I'm an annoying commentator on a product that someone likes for the product, you know, I'm just a negative part of that experience for them, and they're going to keep coming back and hating it. Wink, nudge, Paul Felder. Nah, he's all right. Regarding closing the distance, well, this week I did a big study on Dave LeDuc, and I was watching his first fight with Tun Tun Min, and Tun Tun Min just ruins his day. Dave LeDuc tries to fight long and teep and kick with his lead leg and stuff like that, because he's a good deal taller. And Tun Tun Min just keeps timing cut kicks on his standing leg and then driving straight in with punching combinations, getting chest to chest. It's a really interesting fight to look at, because obviously a lot of the famous Letway guys like Tun Tun Min, Tway Marchong, Tutu, very aggressive. But Min really he does it in quite a smart way against LeDuc in the first fight. So cut kicks are always good. Wait for them to come back with a kick to the standing leg. You can time it like Fedor against Krokop. You know, they kick high, you immediately kick at the same time, intercept them with a low kick to the standing leg. Or you can take the kick on your guard and return with the cut kick underneath. Think like Hakeem Duodo in his last fight against, was that Julio Arce? But yeah, waiting for kicks and returning with kicks is a great option. Learning to parry kicks and get up the inside. Look at Jorge Masvidal versus Donald Cerrone. Entering off the opponent's kicks is always a good idea, because they're on one leg. You know, they've got to get the other leg back to the floor before you get in on them. Having said that, I just remembered you said no low kicks. But equally, you know, if they kick high, you can still parry the kick across them and get in with punches. Always be careful parrying the kick across yourself, because, you know, so many guys are getting good at spinning through on that shit now. If you parry the kick and you throw it across yourself, you can just throw them into a spin. So a lot of guys are good at parrying the kick and slamming it down to the floor across them. So like trying to throw their... So say they kick with their left leg, left round kick to the head or whatever, and you parry it across yourself with your left hand, and you try and slam that kick down basically onto your lead foot. So it's across them but going down in front of them, so they don't have the ability to just spin on the spot. Other options, I mean, the basic principle of closing is you either go forward, cut the ring, use the ropes against their back to cut the space off and get in on them, or you take a step back and make them come to you and then step in and intercept. Those are your two basic methods of closing the distance, and both of them are very reliable. Establish either the front leg teep or establish either a side kick or a front kick and come in behind the high knee, whether it's a sideways high knee like you're doing a side kick or just a raised knee like you're doing a front kick. And shifts / cheap punches, very good stuff too. Learn to punch with your left hand as you step forward with your right hand, and then step through again. You know, that's a great way to cover some distance too. Like I said, I did this Dave LeDuc study this week, and he uses a right elbow, a really long right elbow, which is, you know, not great tactically normally, but he'll shift through into a left hook if they step back. Did it to Seth Brzezinski and knocked him down twice with the same technique. Though again, elbow, not to your case, but the other, you know, the principle is there. Shifting punches, a good shout. And if you want to close distance on shifts, generally a good idea to shift so that you're going down the outside of the opponent's stance, like if you're southpaw versus orthodox and you're just trying to sneak down the outside of their stance. Cheers, Joe. Right, I reckon that'll do us for this week. I think I managed to milk some content out of there being fuck all going on. If you want to support the podcast and read that big Dave LeDuc study that I just did, complete with beef analysis of Liam Harrison versus Dave LeDuc on Instagram, sign up to the Patreon. If you want to send an email to the podcast, fightsgonepodcast@gmail.com. And if you want to see what I'm writing at any time, fightprimer.com. I'm your boy Jack Slack, and I can't fucking wait for these fights to start up again.